We are back with more NBA playoff coverage, and in this one, I'll be covering Game 2 of the NBA Finals. To get things into it, we know in the last one that Haliburton put on the last-second heroics to vault the Pacers to a Game 1 victory and to accomplish exactly what they were looking for when it came to at least stealing one game at home and making the Thunder's home court advantage irrelevant, nullifying it, at least for the time being. But if they wanted to go for the ultimate lead and give themselves a 2-0 margin, they needed Tyrese Haliburton to dictate the flow of the game. Because even with the shot, let's be quite honest, he was not necessarily in his comfort zone there. They were jamming him completely. They were grabbing on him, making sure that he could not get himself open off the ball. Most of his shots were incredibly difficult, and most of his passing lanes that he would normally try to create, whether it was through the jump pass, the routine passes, you name it, they were swarming him completely to where he had a good amount of turnovers in that game as well. And the team, by and large, did on a similar level. So if they would cut those down and have Haliburton just go ballistic, they had a pretty good shot of winning this game. But even without being able to watch the first half live, I can tell you right now that did not happen. We have consistently, over the course of pretty much the last couple seasons now, in this entire playoff run, of course, certainly have given Tyrese Haliburton his praise, as we should. It's well-deserved. He's vaulted himself into one of the best rising talents in the NBA right now, and we get, for the most part, that he is a superstar. But there are moments as well where you have to be willing to criticize players that you tend to favor. And that has to happen here. Because even if you are a super fan of Tyrese Haliburton, you have to acknowledge that this Game 2 performance, when it counted, was porous. How about just 3 points in the first half with a single three-pointer in just like 25% shooting from the field or so? He had pretty much as many turnovers as assists, at least by the end of the game. And that certainly was not being utilized to his advantage in the first half either. He could not find anybody, from his own passing to help generate offense. And as a result, they did struggle. You see, the downfall of the Indiana Pacers in this particular game wasn't necessarily the turnovers. Now, granted, they did lose that battle, but it wasn't necessarily by a large amount. When it came down to it, they could not make shots to save their lives. And you have to credit the Thunder defense overall for forcing the ball out of Haliburton's hand to make sure it ran through pretty much anyone else but him. Most of the time it ended up working because you have such a versatile defense to where even if you have one person strictly guarding Haliburton at one time, you can deploy so many others in different spots of the court to make sure that other players don't necessarily get themselves involved to the most effective level either. Now, there were some, faults with that plan. I mean, Benedict Mathurin, for example, had an exceptional game in his role. T.J. McConnell did okay, and Aaron Nesmith continued to be a big time player for them, just hitting 3-point shot after 3-point shot. But when it came down to it, not only did Haliburton continuously struggle outside of, 12 fourth quarter points, although again, by that point, they had reached a lead as high as, I think, 23. They were, cutting it down a little bit, but it didn't really end up mattering. And then Pascal Siakam as well. I would have to believe that Chet Holmgren was the matchup on him, and we'll get to Chet Holmgren in a second. But as far as Siakam goes, just 3 of 11 from the field for 15 points as well is not going to cut it. The turnovers didn't help matters. But at the end of the day, to have rushed offense like that and not be able to convert enough shots, this particular game is a scenario in which that can have a drawback. Because by jacking up so many shots and then not having them go in, not being able to secure many extra opportunities or second chance opportunities, you then give the other team more possessions throughout the course of the game. And with a team the way the Thunder are assembled, you can't make that mistake with them. You just needed more from Haliburton because, the shot did help, obviously, to secure them a Game 1 victory. But he has largely struggled in this entire series. You get a game from SGA yesterday where he's just completely in the zone. No matter who's guarding him, he remained consistent, poised, and very effective from the field, might I add. I'm not necessarily going to spoil his points, but let's just say that he was 11 of 21 from the field throughout the course of the night. And he was consistent in being able to draw fouls at the line. No one could stop him whatsoever. And that kind of force is what you needed in this situation. Now, it might not have led to the blowout victory that the Thunder ended up getting, but at the very least, you give yourself a fighting chance to win, and you make sure that you can go toe-to-toe with them. And their clear superstar. It is just a recurring theme with Tyrese Haliburton. And we are in that position again where, he is now playing passive again. There are pockets of time where he tries to be aggressive. And it's like that mainly is a testament to, his own volition. And also how exactly the Thunder defense continues to approach him. Because even though he is trying on a good amount of these possessions, they're not letting him get free. They're making sure that other offensive ball handlers as well can find themselves in a jam in a very unorthodox spot on the court. And preventing Haliburton from being the potential outlet like he typically would be on plays that are bound to break down a little bit. Now again, like I mentioned, he hit 4 threes or so. Well, not 4 threes, but he had a fourth quarter flurry. Even if that's all right, it's you needed that much earlier. Because the halftime deficit was virtually the same thing. Kind of. We were down 59-41. As a team, they were shortened horribly, but knowing that Tyrese Haliburton is the engine to said team, that is just a missed opportunity on his end to truly show his capability as just let's just put it like this. For the people who I guess continue to say that he isn't a superstar, you are going to heighten the noise even more when you have a game where Haliburton struggles like that and SGA just outclasses him completely, if that makes sense, in multiple ways. Like his ability to force contact, force pressure, and force attention inside the paint opened up so many lanes for other people on this Thunder squad that you could argue that he was a much better facilitator, playmaker in this ball game than Haliburton had been for pretty much the entirety of the first two games. And that's what it's going to take for the Pacers to, continue to stay in the fight and potentially win games down the line in this series. I don't necessarily expect them to shoot that badly, but even if they don't, you have to find some sort of way to get Tyrese Haliburton consistently involved. Whether it is with off-ball movement, whether it is with consistent screens, and whether you blend all of that in with him being able to take the ball up the court on certain possessions or not. A shift is going to have to happen, because if you continue to repeat this, it wouldn't be too difficult to find the Pacers placing themselves in a hole as these games go along. But as for the Thunder, how about them? Like, they had mentioned that there was a 19-5 run or so in less than 5 minutes in the second quarter, and that vaulted them to this 18-point lead at halftime. But as I watched the entire second half, that whole team was just on fire. The two-way plays were exceptional. The usual suspects in Lou Dort and, Jalen Williams were able to completely affect the game, get Haliburton out of rhythm, and in turn, just mess with that entire team's psyche in this one. And offensively, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander wasn't necessarily alone in this pursuit of victory. Now, he did have 34 points, giving him, I believe, the most points in the first two games of an NBA Finals debut for a player with 71 combined from game 1 and 2. So, as great as that is, and as good of an all-around game as he had, for him to consistently dish the ball out in these cases, you have to have players hit their shots, and they certainly did. Jalen Williams had a much better game with 19 points on efficient shooting, and he was able to bait the team into fouls as well. How about Alex Caruso? Getting multiple steals in the game, hustling his ass off for rebounds, and getting himself a 20-point outing as well on efficient shooting. I mean, there were multiple plays where they just gave up backdoor cuts to him easily by focusing on a guy like SGA. And there was another possession, too, where he's just driving in and everyone is collapsing in on him, basically, leaving Caruso open in the corner. At that point, that is never a person you should be leaving wide open in the corner. And he subsequently made them pay for that. How about Aaron Wiggins as well? He hasn't logged a crazy amount of playing time in the last two rounds. But even he just came in the game scorching hot, shooting 6 of 11 from the field, getting like, I think, 18 points of his own or so. It was just complete madness. And, they at a certain point of time had 5 players with at least 15 points, which would end up being the first instance of that happening since the 2019 Raptors squad. As impressive as that was, though, I feel like I mentioned Chet Holmgren for a very good reason. He ended up with a much better performance overall on both sides. 15 points on 6 of 11 shooting for him as well. But his defense truly made things difficult here. Because I'm certain that, especially in that first half, there were possessions where Tyrese Haliburton did at least try to will himself into the paint and get some buckets. But anytime you're trying to test the front court duo of Hartenstein and Holmgren, you're going to have some problems. And I can imagine that scared him off a little bit for that specific time, allowing Holmgren to get himself the leverage he needed to focus on other guys at the time and make sure that he was doing an excellent defensive job on them. Again, I'm sure Pascal Siakam had to deal with him at multiple points. And to hold him, one of the more consistent co-stars in this entire NBA playoffs, to just 3 of 11 shooting is pretty solid. Obviously, Pascal Siakam has had multiple games under 20 points, but at the same time, he's been more efficient than that. And this game could have been completely different if he did turn things around. Also, Obi Toppin in this game was just a pretty weird fit. I don't know. There were plays where I truly could not understand what the hell he was doing. He had routine layups that missed. He had a pretty dumb turnover of his own. It was just a sluggish day for him in that entire squad. And one that could become a pattern if they don't clean those things up. You know that SGA is going to get his. But the key is to not allow the Thunder to just get all these open looks. Because even if you get the slightest bit of, contact, you get the slightest element of any sort of defense on those shots, any sort of attention, more than likely the Thunder are going to miss. They're not that great of a three-point shooting team. That's well known. To consistently give that to them, even if they aren't necessarily the greatest squad at making three-pointers, damn near every single NBA player can make a three-pointer if they're open enough. And there were too many times where that Pacers defense, which I guess you could say was another issue here, got incredibly lazy. I mentioned some of the backdoor cuts. Those were preventable. I guess some people as well, you're trying to do all you can to guard SGA, and at a point when he's hitting some of those tough-ass shots, some of those signature shots that he's known for, there's almost nothing you can do to stop it. But that doesn't mean that you still give him a free look. Get a hand up. Continue to get physical with him. Don't let him completely just deter your mood and get you to check out of the game in a mental sense. It's hard to retain, any sort of consistency when it comes to stopping him. But damn. Something's gotta give. You gotta put forth the effort. These are literally the finals. first for both teams. And the Thunder were able to put down a full display on both sides of the ball. So honestly, why couldn't the Pacers do the same thing? The Pacers, they like to play with speed. But this game, eventually, as they cruised the Thunder to a 123-107 victory, this game was about physicality. Even with both teams getting a pretty solid amount of three-pointers each, it came down to physicality. The Thunder completely wiped the floor with them in that department. And while it's okay to try to get the upper hand in terms of pushing the ball up the court and converting fast break opportunities, it feels inevitable that the Pacers will have to try in certain cases. Obviously, they're going to want to establish their pace, but they're also going to have to start matching the physicality in order to last. They have to. There's no way they can continue going through these games, allowing themselves to get punked like this. It can't happen, because they will lose again if they allow the Thunder to just run amok out there. Straight like that. That'll do it for the game. Again, fair amount of developments for both sides, of course. But at the end of the day, it was a blowout and a very strong response from the Thunder after suffering that kind of loss. It lined up with exactly what I said at the end of that particular video. They're a team that is pretty fucking resilient. So I couldn't have necessarily expected them to look sluggish in the second game, knowing what was at stake. But man, it would have been pretty crazy if they did end up losing. Nonetheless, either way, they both accomplished what they needed to. They secured themselves a win prior to going over to Indiana for the finals. And man, that Indiana crowd is going to be so fucking lit. I already know what time it is. You can bank that. Come Wednesday night, it's on. At the same time, the Pacers still are in very good position. It's not necessarily time to hit the panic button, but there are things that they need to retool, because they still have essentially stolen home court advantage. I feel like if you're the Pacers, you certainly want to come away with at least one game at home, right? Because my thinking is that this really could go to 7. I don't necessarily think they would end up winning both games, although, again, that would be pretty fucking cool, right? Just one game at home. And if you can get them both, great. But it's all going to start with Game 3 on Wednesday night. So stay tuned in for that. As for other developments, the New Orleans Pelicans and Philadelphia 76ers are going to lose a couple of key contributors to their teams to the Atlanta Hawks. As of yesterday, they acquired both general manager Bryson Graham and Peter Dinwiddie from the 76ers, the executive, as the senior vice president of basketball operations and senior vice president of strategy and analytics, respectively. It's a pretty interesting hire. Now, I'm not necessarily that familiar with Bryson Graham or Peter Dinwiddie, but what I can tell you is that knowing who they have both worked with in their respective tenures with both the squads. I don't know about this one right now, personally. I mean, Bryson Graham is essentially the one working under the likes of David Griffin, who was also ousted earlier in this offseason. I don't necessarily know if I trust that. And obviously, that might be a little harsh. Bryson Graham is his own character. I can't necessarily fault him completely for what the hell David Griffin was doing at the time. After all, that's his understudy. There's not a lot of legroom that he has. Maybe with a change in scenery, Graham can pick up some tools of the trade that make him much better with this particular team instead. And that would do wonders for the Hawks. I mean, in reality, the Hawks and the Pelicans are in the same situation. Literally the same situation. They're trying their hardest to determine whether or not they want to keep their superstars, their franchise superstars, as members of the team. More so Zion Williamson than Trae Young, from what I've seen at least. I can't imagine Trae Young would get moved on from like that. But, they're both going to ask those questions. And so they're looking for co-stars to match up with. The Hawks are certainly struggling to find their footing with landing talent. But the Pelicans as well, they haven't necessarily had that problem. They've landed the players that they felt at the time were going to do wonders with the squad, but they haven't panned out. Ironically enough, DeJounte Murray came over from Atlanta and got injured early last season to where he missed the rest of the year. So they couldn't really do much with him, and even when he was playing, he wasn't necessarily efficient. When it came to shooting from the field, whether it came to facilitating, he wasn't effective. His defense had also dropped off a little bit. And then CJ McCollum, similar thing. He's not a true point guard. You're asking him to handle those duties, and as a result, his efficiency has also tanked. He's only getting older in age, so do you truly want to keep him around at that point? I'm not sure. As for Dinwiddie, Vice President of Strategy and Analytics, under the likes of Daryl Morey. Need I say more? I mean, it fits perfectly, right? Strategy and analytics. Everyone knows that Daryl Morey is a fucking stats and analytics junkie when it comes to the game of basketball. Everybody knows that. And again, Peter Dinwiddie could have a different way in approaching these things. But I'm certain that he's learned something from the likes of Daryl Morey over the course of this time that he would also try to incorporate with this team. And the Hawks better just hope and pray that whatever, schemes he does cook up are truly worth it and beneficial to their squad. Because if they don't, both of these hires are going to just be completely horrible in the long run for them. In other news, Darius Garland recently got his surgery for this recurring toe injury, and he has just been ruled out essentially for the next 4 to 5 months with injury. So, as far as it stands now, if it takes the full 5 months, his earliest return would be around early November at this point. But if it does happen a little shorter, then he could make it back within, I guess, like the first few days of the next season. You know, you want to have Darius Garland in there for as much as you can, but if he's got to recuperate at that time, you know, they may go on a little bit of a slide, but obviously you have Donovan Mitchell holding down the fort, so they should be okay. They will not necessarily have him out for too much, but as long as you can weather that storm and get out to a good record before getting Darius Garland back, they should be more than fine. But that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.